people are always going to be navigating financial challenges, and there are always going to be tools to help them on that journey. And so a book like yours is very evergreen in that sense. But I also feel like that was part of the pressure you were feeling to get the book right, because you did want it to be something that could be used 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And so you wanted it to speak to people now, but you also wanted to speak to people who happen to be discovering the book many years from now.
Hey, journeyers. Welcome to part 2 of my two-parter conversation with Amanda Bauch. You heard her in the first part that came out last week, where we talked about more of the insight and backstory and background of who Amanda is and the publishing industry. I thought it was a great setup to this episode, or this part of the conversation, where we dive deeper into the creation of my book, Your Journey to Financial Freedom. Amanda was with me through almost, the entire creative process, helping me with the writing and editing. She even helped me, with the title and cover. And so I just feel like her kind of almost interviewing me and getting me to open up about the process and just share some insights about the book is helpful, I hope, to celebrate the fact that Your Journey to Financial Freedom has officially been out now for about 6 months. And I just still can't believe that I'm a published author. If you want to check the book out, you can go to yourjourneytofinancialfreedom.com. That's where you can find out all information about the book. And I'm so excited for you to hear this conversation. All right. I do want to kind of segue now into my book, Your Journey to Financial Freedom, and talk a bit about that process. And this is kind of where we switch to you interviewing me.
Yes.
But really, it's just a conversation, because I wanted to, we've had many conversations over the years of working together. Yeah. And so I think what I want this to be is just like a candid discussion of the process of, working together, and then, just how this book came to be.
Yeah, I love it. Let's go. So like I said, so we've had a long relationship, and we've been through many ups and downs, not only in the process of writing the book, but just in our actual real lives. And, so it's interesting, when I partner with authors, just to be along, not only for the ride of the book publishing, but also for your day-to-day life and, all the things you're experiencing in the process of writing a book. And so, I often will say it takes a village to launch a book. It's like, yes, you were the author, you were single-handedly writing the book, but there's so many other players involved in it, not just at your publisher, but, your family, your friends, your peers, people who share the space, who are, maybe have already published a book and are able to mentor you during the process. And of course, when you are signed a book contract, the most important thing you are doing is actually writing the book. And as you learned very much, it is not a sprint, it is a marathon. And even when you think you're done, you still are not done.
Never done.
Yes, it's never done. So I would just love for you, Jamila, if you can share with us, just describe what the process of writing the book was like for you, as far as, coming up with the idea, coming up with the structure, actually drafting the chapters. So can you describe what that process was like for us?
I had wrote this tweet, or, I put out on X about what I wanted my book journey to be. And I wrote, I'm looking forward to finishing my book proposal, securing an amazing literary agent, signing a significant deal with a top publisher, and then writing a book that will not only be a bestseller, but a perennial seller. So very high overview goals.
Yes.
and broke down a lot of steps into one sentence. But I basically started or sent out my book proposal in October of 2021.
Okay.
And so I had started it actually in the previous year, in 2020, is when I took the leap to think about this book. And so even though the proposal was sent out in October of 2021, I did 2 agents. I did sign with a literary agent very quickly. I had about 5 or 6 that wanted to work with me, thank goodness. And so I signed with the literary agent in November of 2021. Okay. And they were on it very quickly
Mm-hmm.
to then send my proposal out to their connections into the publishing contacts they had.
Mm-hmm.
And so my book went to auction, meaning in December 2021,
Mm-hmm.
where I had multiple interviews at first up front with publishers. I think it was maybe 12 or 13. And this was all
Mm-hmm.
on Zoom. So I guess
Mm-hmm.
back in the olden days, people would come into the office. You can correct me, Amanda. Like
Mm-hmm.
when they were interested in an author, these would be
Mm-hmm.
in person interviews or meetings. But for
Mm-hmm.
me, this was all on Zoom over the
Mm-hmm.
course of like 2 weeks, meeting with all these potential publishers. And it
Mm-hmm.
was kind of like a mixed, they're interviewing me, I'm interviewing them to see kind of what kind of help they will provide or what they see this vision of the book to be. And by
Mm-hmm.
then I pretty much had the skeleton of the book, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the book proposal is like a business proposal,
Mm-hmm.
where you are writing out, here's what the book is about, here are some sample chapters, here's how you're going to market the book. So all of that was mostly decided for already, but I
Mm-hmm.
also knew from my research that sometimes that can change depending on who you
Yes.
sign with, and they may have a different vision, or you may change your mind a little bit about how you want to approach it.
Yes.
And so the book went to auction in December 2021.
Okay.
I did accept, I previously talked about the publisher that I thought was best for me, who happened to also, give a very healthy advance, which I was very excited about. And then, I got to work kind of right away. So the announcement was made in Publishers Marketplace in January of 2022. So that's
Mm-hmm.
where kind of like officially, if you get
Mm-hmm.
a traditional deal, and it can be published in this, the Publishers Weekly to show, hey, this author just got signed to by this agent to this publishing
Mm-hmm.
deal. And from there, I knew that I had to get to work to get this book into the world.
Yes.
Now, when I first signed with my publisher, I was assuming it would take like 2 years for the book to come out. So I was like, okay, I
Mm-hmm.
have some time. So I actually thought my book would be coming out this year when I first
Mm-hmm.
initially signed. So
Mm-hmm.
that would be 2024. I was like, okay, maybe spring, maybe even, January, February of 2024, the book will come out. And I remember having more conversations with them after kind of accepting them to be my publisher, that they wanted it out quicker than that. They were like, we
Mm.
think that this should come out actually, in December of 2023. And I was actually scared.
Mm-hmm.
Even though there was so much time between me writing the book and it coming out, I also knew production wise that they needed time to turn around anything I submitted. There was going to be a lot of editing. And then, like, was I ready to submit and do a book that quickly?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I learned through my research was that while the publishers mean well and they want to help you, because I'm thinking, you gave me all this money, so I'm assuming you want this to also succeed, is that they're also very busy on their side with multiple projects. And so I said to myself, I'm going to need to invest in help, because while I think that they are going to do the best they can, ultimately they're going to be busy. And this is my first time in this space, and I'd love to work with someone who can help me navigate it. And I remember asking my agents if they had recommendations for people. And, one of the first names they brought up was you. And we had, a conversation, and I really just felt immediately just connected. I liked your aura. I could tell that you cared about your work, and that was going to be really important to me. And, I would say this now, knowing what I know now,
Mm-hmm.
I, looking back, there's so much I didn't know, even when talking to you, that
Mm-hmm.
if I wrote another book, like our
Mm-hmm.
conversation and what I need, I think I'd
Mm-hmm.
be much, much more clearer about the support that I really need going forward.
Yes.
But going back to our initial conversation, I just knew that my publisher would be busy. And as much as they said that they would be there and, send in your edits, I had no clue of where to start,
Mm.
because they now have secured me as their author, but they are now on to the next project. And so I was literally kind of like on my own. And so finding a coach, someone who I thought could help me through the process, kind of like the emotional support that it would take to bring this book into the world, but also an editor, which is really important to me, because while I enjoy writing, or I did enjoy writing when I was a child, I know that it's different writing an actual book. And so I wanted someone who actually knew how to structure a nonfiction book, how to edit one, and who could help guide me to what this book could be. So I probably didn't answer your question because I kind of went on like a rant
Yes.
on the
Well,
background.
actually, yes.
But yeah.
Actually, you answered another question I had for you. It's so funny, Jamila, and you're mentioning this, and I don't know if I ever actually told you this. I might have told you early on, but you talking about your, doing the proposal and pitching to publishers triggered a memory that I had forgotten about over these past 2 years was that I loved your proposal because it was sent to us when I was still working at Harper Horizon. And
Oh,
we
wow.
really wanted to sign it, but we knew we couldn't afford you. And I was very sad. And so when your agents reached out to me about you, I, of course, immediately remembered your proposal and was so excited. And so I messaged, my former publisher at Horizon and said, "You'll never guess what project came back to me. I'm so excited." And so there was much rejoicing over that. And I can't believe I completely forgot about that.
Well, and I feel like you might have quickly had mentioned that in the
Hmm.
beginning, which I think is just so funny how small the
Hmm.
publishing world
It's
is.
very small.
And I gotta shout out Megan Stevenson. So Megan Stevenson
Yes.
helped me, basically wrote the proposal, to be honest.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
it was my words and my ideas
Hmm.
and thoughts, but
Hmm.
I knew if the theme that if you're listening to this is that I knew I had to invest in help to get me through
Yes.
this process because I had a very lofty goal of getting the best publishing deal that I could. And I knew in order to do that, I needed the best proposal, which could impress people like Amanda when they saw it. I needed the best agents to get me the best money. So I was willing to kind of put that money up front and pay people like Megan to help me write the proposal. And then, to pay Amanda separately, to help coach me through the process of writing the book. So I
Yes.
think that's pretty cool. It came back
Yeah.
to you.
Yeah, Jamila. Well, and you mentioned just even, hiring people. I mean, I think that's such an important part of the author journey as well, is knowing what your strengths are and knowing when you need, to hire someone to, help you. Because I think sometimes authors might realize that too late in the process. And by then, I mean, sometimes a book needs to get pushed out or, something happens because they have gotten off track somehow. And I will say, obviously working with someone like me or someone like a Megan, let's be honest, it's not cheap. Right.
Right.
But I think obviously you could speak to this, as to whether or not you felt like it was a good investment.
Well, again, knowing what I know now, I would
Mhm.
have paid you more so you could help me more.
All right. Well, for book number two, sign me up, sister.
Because it was so, it's a lot of work.
Mhm.
And, I really thought this is understanding like the difference between like copy editing and developmental editing. There's
Mhm.
so many different types of editing.
Mhm.
And so we if we're going to get to the process of things, we were starting from my proposal as okay, because think about it, like we had this, I forgot how many pages it was like
Mhm.
maybe like 60 pages or
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
of a proposal. And my publisher, having that initial conversation, even though I didn't sign a contract with them for another few months, we did have a conversation like, okay, so you can get started on your book now. And I'm like, but what, how do I start? And it's like, okay, follow your proposal. And we started working together around that time.
Mhm.
And you were able to come in and tell me, okay, so let's look at, do you want to follow the structure of this proposal? How do you want to break it down? And I realized that I did want to change some things. I did want to structure it a bit differently so that it felt like a complete guide. Whereas if someone did not know anything about me, they can come in and read it, you know, whether all from front to back through or pick up sections that apply to them and read
Mm.
it. And so that wasn't
Mhm.
easy to figure out. And so
No.
all that was you kind of helping me and talking me through that, in addition to actually like line editing, like some of the
Mhm.
things that, I was writing. And so in terms of like investment, I always think that it's so important to know what you want your end goal to be and then understand if it's a feasible goal. Like I am all for big goals and shooting for like the moon, but almost similar to someone maybe going to college and taking out like hundreds of thousands of dollars of loans. It's like, what is your degree going to be in, and what is your profession? Are you going to be able to pay back those loans based
Mm.
on what your degree is in? And that's kind of like how I viewed my book journey, is because I
Hmm.
had a goal of getting a very good advance and hopefully selling through the books to earn back that money, that whatever investment I made up front would be worth it to get me to that
Hmm.
point. And then my odds of getting to that point I felt were strong based on, what I saw my peers doing, based on the feedback that I was getting from the agents and then publishers. I felt like I am on track and I have to take that risk or take the investment on in order to see and reap the rewards.
Yes. All right. Thank you. That's a wonderful response. I feel like writing and publishing a book is similar to any other major life goal we have, is that you get out of it what you put into it. And I think that writing a book certainly, falls in that category. And especially in the nonfiction space, nonfiction readers especially have very specific expectations when they read a book. I feel like with fiction, it's very different. It's just more about like whether it's a good story or not. But with nonfiction, especially, there are certain conventions that need to be followed as far as like how the book is organized, how the book is structured, how the book is written. And I think that when you have someone who's very experienced in, helping shape those sorts of books and helping successfully, edit or write them, that can only serve you, and your book at the end of the day. Um, and so, yeah, and so I applaud you, because like I said, sometimes authors think, oh, I can do this, I don't need help, and then they realize too late that they really did need help, and they wish that they had hired someone, even if it were just, to look over a draft even just once, and say if it's working or not.
And I think also understanding your personality and, like you said, like for me, my limitations, to
Mm.
like understanding what I needed.
Hmm.
And so I remember very early on, even before, like years ago, I said, I want to write a book one day, but I didn't want to deal with writing the proposal. And I had someone tell me, like, why don't you just have someone else write it? And I was like, wait, no, but everything has to be me. Like, I want to be a true author where these are my words. I didn't want a ghostwriter ultimately for the book.
Hmm.
And the person was just like, but this is not the book that we're talking about. This is
Hmm.
like someone helping you just get your ideas out so you don't have to stress about this upfront process. You can do the
Hmm.
work that comes later.
Hmm.
And I think that was like actually so helpful to break down kind of like my ego and separating that and understanding for me,
Yes.
right? Some people may choose to have a ghostwriter or
Hmm.
co-author, and that's like totally fine. But for me, I realized, like, you know what, I do want like a lot more help up front with the proposal, and then I do want hand holding through the book writing process, but I want to write the book. And so I know
Hmm.
some people have asked, like, why, did you have a ghostwriter, or why didn't you just, why don't you just hire someone to write it? I think that is very expensive if you do it that way, which again,
Hmm.
I'm not opposed to
Hmm.
investing in yourself, especially if you're very busy and, you want to go that route. But for me, I held fast to my ego in that sense of I
Hmm.
wanted to actually the words in the book, Your Journey to Financial Freedom, to be my words that came through.
Yes. And I think that you said, that it's very individual, right? What works for you may not necessarily work, even for someone who's publishing, in the space or a similar type of book, and you never know where you will be, in your own process. And so like I said, I feel like each book is very unique and necessitates like a unique approach in process. And every author is completely different in what they want or need out of it. Sometimes, an author may just want or need the book to exist so they can use it to like book speaking engagements, or to like have it on their website. So sometimes it almost operates more almost like a calling card, so to speak. And so for some authors, that's the end goal. For some authors, they want to, they've always dreamed of writing a book. And so they go about writing the book. And then there are authors like you who already have like an established platform, an established business. And so the book just serves as like another means by which you can reach, your target audience. And and you just have another tool that you can offer to people to help them, in their financial journey. So for you, your approach is very multifaceted, and the book is just one of those many facets that you use to reach your audience.
Yeah, I think it was really important. Sometimes I felt like such a I don't you know I didn't write the book because I wanted to get more speaking engagements. Like,
Mhm.
actually, like, I don't enjoy necessarily travel as much with small kids
Yes.
just because of the production it takes to have
Mm-hmm.
to leave them and then coordinate who does what. Although
Yes.
when it's a great like opportunity and it
Mm-hmm.
aligns, I love those. But I knew that I didn't want to be or use this as a like, leaping or launch pad into like a speaking like career.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And and I didn't necessarily want to. I didn't have like a lead in magnet yet, at least for like a course or something else like that was like strategically okay. I'm doing this book so that way it can funnel and be this money maker for me. Like, I really wanted the book to compile and to bring together the frameworks and the ideas and the voice of the podcast into another medium that would help people, right? And I thought, okay, the
Yes.
podcast has helped people, but so many people still don't even know what a podcast is. I meet people to this day where I'm just
Mm-hmm.
like, I was talking to one of my son's teachers, and I
Mm-hmm.
was just like, okay, this is how, because she found out that I had the book and there's a podcast, so I showed her how to get the podcast on her podcast app, and so I just
Mm.
realized that the book is just a more accessible way for people
Mm-hmm.
to hopefully get the tools and be inspired the way that hopefully the podcast has inspired people.
Yes, yeah, I agree. Because, and I will say, there, and people consume information in all different types of ways, right? I know for my part, I hardly ever listen to podcasts because my attention span is about 5 seconds. And so for me to commit to listening to like a 45-minute podcast I'm not going to get much out of that experience. But a book, I'll read books all day long. Obviously, that's what I do for a living. So for me, while I might never listen, extensively to someone's podcast, like if I see they publish a book, oh yes, I will certainly, if I'm familiar with them and I like their message, I will happily read a book that they have published. Um, so let's see here. So we've talked a bit about, where you were needing support. So do you want to, or are you willing to speak specifically about the actual process of writing the book, like sitting at your computer, carving out the time, to actually put words on the screen, which obviously then became book words on a page.
Yeah. Okay. So the process, I had an idea of what I'd like the process to be.
Mm-hmm.
So, in my head, I would set my alarm and get up at 5 a.m. and
Mm-hmm.
every morning kind of like have that time from 5 to 7, like deep into deep work of writing and thinking and
Mm-hmm.
peace. And, sometimes that happened, but I procrastinate a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. I have not got officially tested for like ADHD, but
Mm-hmm.
I suspect that I have. Um, I'm I have that. I suspect that, because
Mm-hmm.
it's very hard for me to focus. So even when I
Mm-hmm.
found myself with a large chunk of time, I had
Mm-hmm.
a hard time using all of it. Like, I had to
Mm-hmm.
almost waste some of it first to kind
Mm-hmm.
of feel the pressure to then like get to writing. But
Yes.
even before that, I think one of the things that you helped me with and that we established was before I could write, I needed to understand what I was going to write about. And the
Yes.
thing with finance, personal finance, I don't think I was ignorant to the fact that like everything that we mostly talk about with personal finance has been said before, like, and written about before. And so it wasn't a matter of, and I actually don't enjoy talking like constantly about like the nuts and bolts of certain things. Like
Mm,
I know that it's necessary. So like a budget, talking about a budget is necessary, but it's not something like I
hmm
enjoy
Yeah.
and
It's
is
not
and
it's
are
not
obsessed with.
sexy.
It's
It's
not
not
and
sexy
but
to talk about budgeting.
but you see, I remember, and so I wanted to remember, like ultimately, even why the proposal was so well received by editors, and why I think my work in general is for people who listen and connect is well received, is because it's not what I'm talking about; it's like the way that I talk about it, or the
Yes.
voice, my personal voice and experience, and the vulnerability of it. When I say like I don't know either, like what sometimes what I'm doing, and I was like, well, how do I talk about and not talk about but write about it in a way that translates to be helpful, to not have I can't have everything in the book. And so I needed help with like structuring what that looked like. And I think one of the first things we did was, okay, well, let's like think about like table of contents, like because then we have something to work about
hmm
and work
hmm
through, so you actually know what you're writing. Because sitting down and just like writing, for me at least, like I needed a direction of like
hmm
what is the topic that I'm writing about. And before
hmm
we can even get to maybe the table of contents, is just like the structure of the book. So I think first just getting to that point and breaking it down, and once we found like a what I thought was a good structure in terms
hmm
of breaking out into the parts of the book. So just to quickly review: your journey to financial freedom, we ended up, or I ended up like thinking about it in a way in which, let's break it down into like 4 sections that will be helpful. And so, or 4 parts. And part one was more about like the introduction of the concepts, like the major overview of the concepts, the what, the how, the why of financial independence. Part two was, okay, but now that people have those definitions, understand some of my frameworks, how do they then start to plan their financial independence journey? And that was more about planning. And part three was more about executing. So like, how do you do the things that you need to do to get you to your goals, which is earn more money, pay down debt. And then part four was about enjoying the journey. Once I feel like I had those big sections or big ideas, and then we were able to get down to chapters, that's when I felt like I could write to those points. And I think what was helpful for us is that we met, was it once a week at first in
Yeah,
the
we met
beginning?
weekly in the beginning.
Meeting weekly, and part of it in the beginning was just like, accountability on, okay, I'm going to finish like this amount of pages or this chapter, and sending it to you for general feedback. And so like having that back and forth on a weekly basis was very helpful.
hmm Yes, and I'm so glad also that you brought up the topic of structure. I think what happens sometimes is that authors, if they are going the traditional publishing route and they have a proposal and the proposal has been submitted to accepted by the publisher, they think that that's going to be like the book, but that's not always the case. And I just think back to when you and I had those initial conversations. I mean, I think we restructured the book like several times before we got to a place where we felt, yes, like this is the logical progression, for this. And it was almost like a puzzle that we were trying to solve, and we could see the pieces, but we didn't have like the photograph that showed us what the final puzzle was supposed to look like. And so we're just like, oh, this looks like a tree. Should go with this tree part over here. I felt like that was more of what the process was like, but that's actually quite commonly the way the process is. And so, just so people are aware, just because you have a submitted and accepted proposal, the book will still continue to evolve throughout the process.
Yeah, and I was very lucky that, in some ways, my publisher was like, they trusted me more than I thought that they should, in terms of taking the reins. Because I'm like, are you sure? I'm like, can you look at this? Like, are you sure you want it this way? Like,
hmm
and they're like, yes, go
hmm
ahead. I'm like, but I don't know. And so it was so hard because, like you said, like it was a puzzle, but this book could have been organized and written in many different ways.
So
Like,
many different ways.
and that was what was so confusing, because I was just like, but what is the best way? What is the best way to structure this? Like, it could have also, the puzzle could have been put together another way also. And so sometimes
hmm
that led to doubt about the way I was
Yeah.
structuring things. And then even like, should we like include this section here or there, or do we even need this at all? And I just, at some points though, I just had to be like, you have to pick away and then go forward. And if you've come to a point where you feel like it has to be changed, you change it. But you're never going to start or get things done if you think it has to be perfect before you get going.
Yes, yes. And so that analysis paralysis, could definitely be a hindrance when you're writing, because you're it's all up here, in your head instead of, flowing out of you, like onto the screen or on the page. And I remember you and I having these conversations and me saying to you, you can't edit a blank page. It's like we can just dump it all out. It's like we can make something of it, but it actually needs to exist, before we can improve it and make it what you want it to be.
And two, because I'd write and I'm like, what is this? Like, the first draft or the
Hmm.
first sentences that I'm just like, this is not, in my opinion, at first, like,
Hmm.
this is not good. Like, this feels
Hmm.
very, um, not the dreams of what you think, like sometimes that you're writing, and sometimes it did flow. Sometimes there were things that I wrote, or I would see you edit something back and I'm like, wow, I wrote that, like that's actually impressive. But then sometimes I'd be like, what, like I'm not feeling it, like there's not
Hmm.
fireworks coming off of the
Mm.
keyboards as you're writing. I never got
Hmm.
necessarily into that flow state. Sometimes I wouldn't realize that something was good until I had space from it and read it again. But
Hmm.
in the moment, it didn't feel like I was doing that great. And even now, it still doesn't feel like I wrote a book, because I was like so in the trenches that,
Hmm.
it's like hard to see the progress. I mean, obviously I wrote the book. It's like, it's there, but it felt really like I still can't believe I got through all that and wrote like so many words, because it did feel like it was so much like hard work to kind of get through those, especially the first and second drafts, and then
Mm.
ultimately getting it to where it needed to be.
Yes. And so, so that, because it was a very long process from the time we first met, and started even just talking and thinking about the overall structure of the book to when you actually had like a complete manuscript. That was, golly, how long was that? Was that about a year it took for that? Was it that long?
It might have been, all I know is that the major deadlines always happen like right before like a major, I don't know, event. Like I think my first deadline, my first draft was due to
Hmm.
the publisher before
Hmm.
my birthday.
Hmm.
I was going on
Hmm.
like this birthday trip.
Yes. And
This
we
was like
agreed that that was
yes. And I,
fortuitous. Yes.
right. And I was like, wow, like, I need to get
Hmm.
this done. So it gave me like a
Hmm.
hard deadline to get it done. And I
Hmm.
think my,
Hmm.
like the other final draft was like right before, I think, like right after spring break for my kids. So yes, it took a while to get to the point where we had to submit that draft, that
Hmm.
or from the initial draft to the even just going to the publisher for them to review it.
Yes, yes. As we discussed, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. I once in a while do work with authors who crank out a manuscript in a very short period of time, but typically those authors are full-time writers. They're not entrepreneurs. Oftentimes they don't have small children that they're parenting, and so there's lots of ways a book can come into the world, but I feel especially for authors like you who, do have very complex lives with a lot of moving pieces, that's where the support really becomes critical. Not only just for the physical work of, sitting at your desk or wherever you choose to work and cranking out the writing, but also just for the mental and emotional support too, which I think is really important, to have someone who understands what you're going through. It isn't like, oh, stop being a baby, just get over it and write your book already. Like
Yeah.
someone who understands how hard it is to do what you're doing.
Yeah, that's why. So the support with the writing itself, and then this even the support with the kids,
Hmm.
having that was important, because at the time when I was writing, my youngest was not eligible to go to after school. She was too
Hmm.
young. And so I remember like saying like I need help, because they get out pretty early at about like 2:20. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, even if, I get to the races, like going with writing the book, like there's so many other things in my business still that needed to be done, which by the way, I also let go of needing to do extra things in my business. So
Mm.
for me, I did still do the podcast, but I wasn't really doing much else.
Mhm.
I wasn't showing up online as much live,
Mhm.
like eh, face facing like the audience on social media.
Mhm.
And I had to feel okay with kind of feeling sometimes like left behind a bit in terms
Mm.
of whether that was opportunities or being visible to where, oh, like, wow, I wonder if that opportunity would have came to me if I was more out there.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
so I was like, it's okay, I'm doing the work behind the scenes. So with that, I knew that I needed help with the kids, so getting a babysitter to help pick the kids up and keep them for a couple hours was very important during that time. I remember having my sister come on board. She had some of the flexibility to do that, which was very helpful. um, the summer months, like they had to go to summer camp because there was no way if they were home and I had these deadlines in the summer to write, that I could keep them entertained and then also write. So like just like, even outside of like the professional help, it was just like,
Mhm.
I need help with these kids. I
Yes.
cannot like possibly, you know, do this work and feel like I'm, being a quote unquote attentive mom if they are around and I can't, you know, be there.
Yes. Yes. Well, you very wisely invited a lot of people into your village to support you while you were writing this book. And the thing about writing a book is I feel like it's sort of like pregnancy in a way. It's like, you have a due date. But it feels like the longest 9 months of your life, like especially at the end. But at the same time, it's like, at some point there it will be done. And then you can like pivot and get on with your life. But when you're going through it, no one can tell you anything.
Yeah.
It's like you're just looking at, you just had the date circled on the calendar and you're like, okay, it's like this is when everything will change yet again. Um, but like I said, if no one has ever gone through that, sometimes it can be hard for them to understand, because I think so often I think, I mean, I know even this was the case for me. I was a voracious reader growing up. And obviously that has continued into my professional adult career. But even before I worked at HarperCollins, I don't think I really had a full appreciation of everything that goes into one book. I mean, I tell you, especially after working at HarperCollins, like I would walk into a library or bookstore and I would just look at it in a whole different way, because everything has to be decided on, from like the cover to the cover or the color of what they call like the case, which is like the actual physical book that's under it. The type of paper, all the different font styles. It's like someone actually had to think about those things and put some like thought and intentionality into it. And obviously that was the case for your physical book as well. Do you mind if we talk a little bit about the actual book, the cover and the
Yeah, let's
design a
go.
little bit?
Yeah.
So in the proposal, obviously you have like a title and a subtitle decided upon. However, can you tell people who are listening about the process of actually titling the book? For example, is your book title, the final book title, the same as it was in your proposal, or did it evolve throughout the process? And so what did that look like for you?
Okay, so the original title, well, in the proposal at least, was your journey to launch.
Okay.
And so, it's kind of similar to what the
Mm-hmm.
final title ended up being, which is your journey to financial freedom. I think just having my podcast in the title, like they felt was, just going to be easy for people to pick up to. But I even have the subtitle that we originally had. So it was your journey to launch, build wealth, enjoy life, and find financial freedom. But I also knew like that wasn't going to be the end title. It was just like something as a placeholder. I definitely did envision a a catchier title. Like I always
Mm-hmm.
wanted to have one of those titles where it stood out, like you would understand, like or maybe not even understand, but it would make someone want to pick the book up. That
Mm-hmm.
and the cover. And so doing my research, I remember I came across this interview. I think it was with um, uh, Tim Ferriss and Atomic Habits writer, who I should know because
Yes,
he was on
James
the podcast,
Clear.
James
Yes,
Clear.
you and I
And
talked about
we
that. It's
did.
fascinating.
He did a whole, like, well, not a whole episode, but he talked a bit in his episode with Tim Ferriss about, like, he did all this research on what, like, titles, and how there's certain structures of titles, and like one structure of titles, like there were like four ways in which New York Times bestsellers or titles that were really good, like it was like structured in one of four ways. And one of the ways was, you usually put together two words that you don't typically see, but give you an idea of what it's about. So something like Atomic Habits, like the book is about habits, but you typically wouldn't put atomic in front of habits, and so you're curious to know what that means. Or 4-hour work week, and so it's like, it's really makes the reader think, what do you mean 4-hour work week? And so I was thinking, like, what can I like name this book so that it's catchy? And I remember coming up with all these iterations and combinations, and even putting it into, like, the AI apps to like figure
Hmm.
out, like, give me some suggestions to get my brain working. And we also talked about it. So I remember sending
Hmm.
you like a couple of ideas and sending it to my agents. They also had a just like their input that they wanted to give. But I just couldn't like find like a title that like I really loved. And I remember actually with Your Journey to Financial Freedom, I felt like it was just like so like boring. I was like, it's such like a boring name for a book, but it is very clear on what the book is about. And it
Yes.
does match my brand. So
Yes.
even though it wasn't like, I don't think it was like, the moment where someone like puts on, they say, the wedding dress and they're like, yes, this is the one. Like, it felt very much like, all right, this is the best that I think we can do. And we're running out of
Mhm.
time, that we need to pick a book. Things are moving forward on the production schedule. And I think coming up with like that subtitle, um, a step-by-step guide to achieving wealth and happiness, to clarify what the book was about, was also like a big thing. And I think it was the best that really encapsulated what the book was about. And so we went with that one.
Okay, yes. Yeah, the process of titling and subtitling a book can actually be very excruciating. And so I think, when you land on a title and it's right, I think generally there's a tremendous sense of relief there. And I don't think there's any right or wrong title for a book necessarily. I mean, I think, because like you said, I think so much of it has to do with how you're positioning the book in the market, and just how well it aligns with your particular brand and your messaging. And I think that where you landed with your title and subtitle is very much aligned, with the work you do and your philosophy about financial freedom, especially, and just making it accessible for everyone. And so I think, sometimes a title just needs to communicate, clearly, and that's exactly what yours does. Um, so yeah, so thank you for sharing a little bit about the background as to how you landed on that final title and subtitle. And of course, a big part of the title and subtitle also parlays into the cover design, which can also be a very excruciating process for
Yes.
the book publishing. And even just talking about whether or not you were going to be on the cover, was a whole conversation. So I'm sure that people would love to know how the cover came about.
Yeah, so I initially did not want to be on the cover at all. When I thought about books that were perennial sellers and were timeless and were more thought thinking books that led with, that were big ideas, like the person that wrote the book wasn't on the cover. It was, it was words. The cover was still nice, but it wasn't the actual person. And usually I thought that if a person was on the book, it's usually a celebrity or someone who's very recognizable within that space. And I honestly, for all that it's worth, and as much as like my publishers supported and me being on the cover, I just didn't feel like I was that recognizable, or I needed to be
Mm,
on the cover.
hmm. Hmm.
And I did realize and recognize the importance of like people seeing my face on the cover. I remember I polled my audience and kind of asked them that question, and a lot of them said, you need to be on the cover, we want to see your face. And it's similar to kind of me being on the podcast artwork, but the difference there is I felt like podcast artwork can be changed like overnight or in an hour,
Hmm.
where
Hmm.
and it's not permanent. But a book and printing a book, like it's like permanent. And so it's different. And so part of me didn't want the to exclude people who had maybe were simple minded enough to think that just because a black woman was on the cover that these ideas couldn't apply to like a wider audience. But I also knew the importance of people seeing a black woman on the cover for a book like this. So
Mm-hmm.
that was one of the reasons why I did consider it. And really what pushed it over the edge where I did end up saying yes to it is that my publisher and my agents were just like, listen, people don't often get asked to be on the cover of their book. And so like, you might as well go for it. And then also my kids, and they're very young still. And so for them, like, yes, they can read my name on the title or read the words, but them seeing their mom's face, I think definitely was something that I knew would be special to them. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, why not? And so that process of saying, yes, I want to be on the cover, but I only want to, like, the final cover, I have to love it. So maybe the title, like, I was not like, oh, like, this is the best title in the world, but I wanted to at least, like, love the book cover. And that was my other fear, is that for, most people, when I feel like they're on the cover, I don't necessarily like how the cover looks. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
just like a personal thing for me. So I was like, okay, am
Mm-hmm.
I going to be like too picky with what this looks like? But they were very open to me having like my own stylist. So Elsa, if you see the cover, it's very bright, but Elsa helped pick out the wardrobe, uh, who's my typical stylist for like events or just big things that I'm doing. So being able to hire her, and also I had to come out of pocket a bit to pay her. So they had a certain budget for what they were going to pay for the cover shoot. And so there are certain things that I wanted. And I said, okay, I'm not going to budge on the stylist because I think that's going to really impact what the books look like. And then, they had their photographer and makeup and hair that I kind of leaned more on their expertise to have. But it was really important that they understood that I had to really love the cover for it to go further than it just being, the photo shoot. And they did agree on that. I don't know what would have happened if I saw the final and didn't like it.
Mm-hmm.
Like if that would have been, some contention. But, I remember being very nervous. I had braids in. I had braids in before the cover shoot.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to myself, I actually, the braids, for black women and their hair, like it is a big like deal. And so I knew I wanted to cover those since it was permanent to have my natural hair. And so I
Mm-hmm.
remember like knowing that the cover shoot was going to take place maybe like a week or 2 weeks out. And I still like had braids in. I was like, okay, and I got to take my hair out. Then I got to go get like a kind of like a haircut because my hair needed to be shaped up. Like it was just thinking about like all these things that had to be done before the shoot and then doing that to be prepared for it. But I remember having my sister there to help with just like movement. She's a dancer. So I like felt confident having her on set to help me, and it being a very like actually chill day. Like I really enjoyed the shoot because everyone was so positive on set. And then again,
Mm-hmm.
because I had Elsa as my stylist, I knew that like she would be able to pick out looks that worked. And so the final book cover you see, we had iterations even before what you see now. I think I did an Instagram post that showed like what the publisher sent me. And even like Amanda, you and I, like that's why I loved having you on my team behind the scenes, because like, I'd have conversations with them and then I would be like, okay, Amanda, like, what do you think of this? And you would like give me ideas and just points where I didn't even think about or know that I could push back on. And
Mm-hmm.
so ultimately, I knew I wanted the cover to be bright. I knew I wanted the cover to emote like happiness. And so that when someone saw it, like their mood hopefully would shift. And so with those parameters in place, I think we finally got to a point from the initial like submission of what they thought the cover would be to what it is now. We got to that ultimately.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for explaining that process so well. And it is a process. And, sometimes it does take, like two or three iterations, before you have a cover that you like. And, I've certainly been involved in cover design processes where we'll go along and we think we have it. And then all of a sudden we're like, either the author comes like, I'm sorry, I just really am not loving this cover, or we internally like, try to get people's, responses. And sometimes like the sales team might be like, yeah, we're not going to be able to sell that cover to our accounts. You need to fix it. So there's a lot that goes into, the actual cover. I mean, everything from the fonts and how the fonts are placed, like where, what we call the hierarchy, so where your name is and how big it is, where the title is, how big it is, there's lots of variables involved in that. And so sometimes, it's, you might get like six versions of like quote unquote the same cover, but they have like different arrangements of the title, subtitle, different font styles, different colors. And I will say, for many of the peers in your space, I think that your book is unique in the sense that it's a very unique color. Even if you go into like a bookstore, when you look at the finance space, most of the books, understandably, tend to be shades of green, because green elicits money. So I remember even when you were doing your cover design, I don't know if you remember this, but I had photoshopped like your cover like onto the little shelf at Barnes and Noble just to see how it looked. Sort of sitting there among its peers, and yours just, I mean, that orange just like popped. I mean, it just jumped right off the shelf, and I felt like it very much like encapsulated you and your joy and your energy, and is very whimsical, but not in a immature way, but just in a embrace the journey. It's part of your messaging, and I feel like that the final cover where we landed very much evokes that joyfulness, and it doesn't look like economics textbook or something
Right. Right.
that will like dissuade people from wanting to pick it up and look at it. And so yeah, so the cover design process is a lot of fun, and I think sometimes I just think it's always interesting to see how your concept translates into like a creative person's mind, when you're thinking about working with like a cover designer. It's just always interesting to see how they translate you and your message. And quite frankly, most of your peers are on their cover as well. So I think your publisher was probably right in saying that, sorry, Jamila, you're going on the cover, whether you like it or
Right.
not. I always think it's interesting how, so you're working, for a year, sometimes even 2 years on this book. And then the day finally arrives when it's an actual physical book that exists in the world. And it is one of the most exciting, but also one of the most nerve wracking experiences because it becomes very real in that moment. And so, based on, the timeline, which, as you said, it took a few years, from the time you initially said, oh, I'd love to like write a book, and you found the agent, got the proposal, got the pub deal. Now the book exists in the world. So not only how did you feel like when you actually were able to physically hold the book, but now that you're 6 months, away from that moment, like how does it feel to be like a published author who has this book that exists and can be found in places like Barnes and Noble, and that people are buying from Amazon? Like, how does it feel to be like a published author, like officially published?
Yeah. So I think going back, I really tried to temper my expectations about what I thought the book would do. I do feel like, for me at least, there felt to be like pressure to like sell, a lot of books based on like the expectation of the publisher, which for me was based on my advance, because I'm assuming they want me to sell a lot of books because they gave me, a great advance. And so I tried to control what I could. Like the marketing, like is probably just a whole another episode on like marketing a book and how much work goes into, prepping for a launch and the work it takes to do that and how hard it is to actually sell a book. And so I quickly realized what I would have loved, like that being on the New York Times and like being a breakout seller and selling through like all the first run prints. Like I realized that I had to be, just a bit like realistic, and then also just patient with the process, because I had to go
Mm.
back to my initial goal, which was I wanted it to be a perennial seller, like a consistent
Hmm.
seller.
Hmm.
And that sometimes that takes time, right, and perennial means like it is selling over time and selling, consistently over
Hmm.
time. So when I kind of stepped back and realized that like the reason that I wrote the book was because I wanted this to be another form in which it could inspire people. And so the feedback was going to be important. So outside of me being proud of it, was it going to be helpful? And so like that was
Mm.
how I wanted to measure the success of it, is that when people actually do read it, did they find it useful? And or are people able to apply what I have said in the book to their lives? And so far, like that has been the case. That has been like the feedback that I've gotten. And so being like 6 months out from that moment, but then continuing to see the the feedback come in, it almost makes it feel like it's just ongoing. So yeah, there was that one day, but it does feel like an ongoing process of unfolding, because I know that, as much as I feel like, Amazon selected it as one, the one of the best nonfiction books in December, the month it was released. And, I got like definitely great reviews from editors. It was more of like, what does the audience think? And that to me
Hmm.
is ongoing, because
Hmm.
like there's some people are still discovering it and some people don't even still
Yes.
know that it exists. And the other thing that I thought was interesting is that actually my book was in like Barnes and Nobles like a week before the actual release date, which I thought was, I never
Yes.
knew that was like possible.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I thought that was interesting, because it wasn't like that one day going in like this. The book came out December 5th. So it wasn't like going like December 5th or 6th going in and being like, oh, look at it. It was like I was actually able to experience that moment like a week or two before.
Hmm.
And so it's not that it was climatic. It was more just like, it just felt this was a natural progression of what was happening, and it
Hmm.
didn't feel like everything was bottled up for one big moment. It just felt like a lot of small big moments happening over time.
Yes, and I think that you discovering it in Barnes and Noble a week before the actual release date is it's sort of a micro moment of what it is to be a published author. Obviously, there are many authors who only ever publish one book. There are authors who publish many books. But I think, especially for the first book, I think that your perspective that, you want it to be a perennial seller is a very healthy perspective. Sometimes in the publishing industry will refer to that as what we call evergreen titles.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we know that there are certain books that will just be a flash in the pan. It's like they had the TikTok video that went viral, or they just happen to be in the news for some reason. But then there are books like yours where it's a perennial topic. It's like people are always going to be navigating financial challenges and they're always going to need tools to help them on that journey. And so a book like yours is very evergreen in that sense. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I also feel like that was part of the pressure you were feeling to get the book right, because you did want it to be something that could be used, 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And so you wanted it to speak to people now, but you also wanted to speak to people who happen to be discovering the book many years from now.
Yeah. So even though my ideas of what a big idea book was
Hmm.
that the person wasn't on the cover, I still wanted it to be a big idea book with hopefully interesting concepts that would, if you picked it up 5 years from now, say, oh, well, that's a nice way that she put that, or that's a different way that I can now look at this topic, and I never thought about that before. So that was very important to me, and probably what held me up a little bit, but then I had to let that, even now. So me saying that I want to make sure that the book is impactful and I care about the reviews is also me understanding that not everyone is going to like the book,
Yeah.
and that it's not for everybody,
Yes.
and not putting too much stock also in the opinions of other people. So I think like initially just like
Hmm.
me being satisfied with it is like the most important thing, because I'm
Hmm.
thinking, okay, so if Oprah calls me tomorrow, or some big, I don't know, platform that really can help set this book, and I really have it, sell millions of copies. If that happens and one person has the power to change the fate of the book,
Hmm.
um, is that what I'm waiting for? Is that what I'm going to base my happiness and contentment for? Like, or can I feel that before that happens and be content and
Hmm.
happy with what I've done? And
Hmm.
so I've gotten to a place where I'm content and happy with the work that I've produced. And at this point, like, I'm going to continue to talk about it, continue to usher people to buy it, and I hope people still buy it. But I just realized that I can't focus too much on the end result that I can't control anymore.
Yes. I always tell authors, it's like you can only control what the words on the page. It's like you can't control how people respond to those words. And I know some of these authors will get discouraged when they have, maybe not so great reviews of their book, and I always encourage them and say, it's good to have people who don't like your book. I'm like, and especially when you're even talking about things like Amazon, frankly, sometimes when you see like a book only has 5-star reviews, I mean, that's very suspicious, because it's like,
Well,
are they review farming? Are they buying positive reviews? If they're more equitable, then that people are having authentic responses, to the book, which I actually think is better. And frankly, like you said, not every book is for every reader.
Well, it's funny you say that because on Amazon, well, one, I'm just like, can more people actually review the book publicly? So, by the
Mm.
way, if you have
Mhm.
read the book, if you have the book,
Yes.
please go review the book on Amazon. You can go to yourjourneytofinancialfreedom.com/review. That takes you directly to the Amazon review page, and that will take you a few minutes. And you can also go to Goodreads. You can like goodreads.com and search my book. But funny enough, my Amazon reviews are pretty positive. I don't want to jinx myself, but they are actually the 5 stars you talk about. Like, I think one person
Yes.
gave it a 4. So like someone could look at this and be like, hey, is this like real? And
Yes.
my Goodreads review, I think, is definitely the more critical of
Hmm.
side of things, which I don't
Hmm.
mind because I
Hmm.
almost think it's like the Goodreads readers are actually like they read, like that's what they do. And
Yes.
so they're very
Yes.
much more critical, which I don't mind, of the book. And then Amazon is more like they're shopping for everything there. And so, they're going in and maybe just giving their honest opinion, which so far has been good. I think what I've learned, and this might have been one of your questions, which is funny because I thought this while I was writing it, but I think I know for sure now after it's been out, and the
Hmm.
reviews that are more critical of it
Hmm.
show me who this book really is for.
100%. It
And
really clarifies your
yeah,
audience.
it does. And I'm like, if I write, another book or do something again, it even clarifies more on, you
Sure.
know, what's next. And so
Yeah. Yes.
I
It
would
needs to
say that,
be the 1-star reviewers want your next book. Like your next book will be written specifically for them.
or just like the 3. So, like the ones that give it
Hmm.
like the lower stars,
Hmm.
their gripe would be, there's nothing new here, or I know all this already.
Hmm.
And then the
Hmm.
ones that actually, love it or give it a 5, is, a lot of that, the review is like, wow, like I thought about this differently, or it gives these steps. So sometimes the people that really love it are saying the opposite of what the people who really didn't enjoy it say, which is like, I learned so much and it's given me these steps, or broke down this concept, like the 5 guac levels, or like the 5 stages. Like, I really enjoyed thinking about it in that way. But it got me thinking that, while I would love everyone to be able to like pick this up, we already know that when you do that and when you write a book for everyone, then it just becomes like noise a bit. Like, it doesn't talk to anyone. And I
Hmm.
think my book, it really is for the beginner or even intermediate like journeyer, like the more advanced person that knows it all, who's been there, done that, and kind of like has it all together,
Hmm.
may not, unless they just love my voice and work, like may not like get much new things from the book if they're not,
Hmm.
open to like some of the concepts that I'm talking about.
Hmm.
But really what it just since it's been out has focused me on is that it's like the person, and again, why I wrote the book and felt compelled to write the book and start the podcast was because I was writing it hopefully for someone like myself who didn't know this concept of financial independence existed and wanted someone to explain it in a way that got them excited to make changes. And
Hmm.
so I've learned that since the book has come out, like, okay, this is like the market or the target for this book, not the person that thinks they know it all, and like,
Hmm.
they maybe need more advanced concepts and details on specific investment advice, but this won't be the book for them if they're looking for that.
Yeah, no, and I think and that's like I said, so that's what I say to authors as well. Sometimes they'll say, I'll say to them, well, who is your target audience? They'll say, this book is for everybody. And then, of course, I'm like, whoa, okay, let's back it up here a bit, folks. Because I always say, if you've written a book for everyone, then you've written a book for no one. And so I think, and I think for your book, especially, I think that it's good that you have paid attention, to how people are responding to it, because it not only it lets you do two things, right? One, it lets you know that you 100% hit the target with what you intended to do with the book, which is help people who are just starting out on their journey and just need to better understand like the concepts and have some tools that they can apply. But you also know now that is not a book for people who are more advanced and are further down the road. And so that, of course, gives you an idea for the next book, which is, to present more advanced, concepts and tools and processes that can help people who are a little further down the road, which I think is wonderful because sometimes it's hard to come up with a concept for a second book. And there's always that constant fear of the sophomore slump, right? Which is pretty well known not only in book publishing but also in like the music industry, the movie industry. They always say the sequel never does as good as the original, and so I think that that's a legitimate concern. And so I think because of how people are responding to this first book, you are already gaining so much valuable intel on who the target audience for your next book could possibly be. Well, especially in this day and age with our, economy being a little volatile, and a lot of people are just really struggling to make ends meet. And so I think that's one of many reasons why your book is just very important right now. But at the same time, lots of people are recognizing the struggle, and there's just a glut of financial independence, financial freedom, and just, nuts and bolts like budgeting and managing your money types of books on the market. I, of course, feel that your book is very unique, and I have my reasons for thinking that, but I would love for you to share what specifically it is about your book that sets it apart from all of the other books that it shares space with on the shelf.
I think I mentioned before that the personal finance space, like there's but so much like new information you can present, even in the advanced topics. Like there are just like facts, like mathematics behind like what works, like
Mm-hmm.
everyone is aware they need to increase their income, pay off debt, save. Like I think we all know those things. And so what the theme or the concepts in my book, what I aim to do, what I hopefully did was to just present them in a different way and put together the puzzle pieces for people where it makes the steps clearer. So not
Mm.
only kind of bridging that gap between general personal finance, like, okay, you need to learn how to budget. And, I don't talk about credit scores much, but just like financial health in general, I think the next realm or like where I straddle is financial independence and this
Mm.
big idea concept of, being financially independent from a job and doing work you love. And or just enjoying your life. And so I think it bridges the gap between those two parts. Like it's a little bit more advanced than just like basic, hey, this is how you budget and save to buy a house, or here's how can never work again and you should go gung-ho to be financially independent. It kind of gets in the middle of that, but then also heavily talks about not just like the like what and definitions, but like the internal why and
Mm.
motivation behind it. And so touching upon like the mindset and the internal like beliefs and habits, I think are so important within this space that some people just like don't touch. Like it's either they're going the methodical route and very much like A, B, C, D. And then sometimes people go the very high kind of like level. I don't want to go like, it's never too spiritual, but like there's just like a overview heavily on mindset and you can create
Mm.
your own universe kind of
Like
thinking.
manifesting sort of my,
Yes,
yes,
yeah, where I do
content.
think there's a like a bridge or medium in that. Like I think the practical and magical and spiritual work together. And like, kind of like, hard work and preparation is like luck, right? And so
Mhm.
how do you break that down into finance concepts that people can understand and get excited about and feel motivated to accomplish like their whatever dreams they have for them?
Wonderful. Thank you for articulating that so well. I do think it sort of sits in that very unique space, and for your target audience, there's something there for the people who just want the spreadsheets and the checklist, and the very tactical, like nuts and bolts, tools that they can use and leverage on their journey. But then there also is the sort of, I call, they call the genre self-help. I prefer the phrase self-improvement. And so for the people who do want to do some inner work around their ideas and, philosophies about money, there's something there for them as well. And I think one thing that you did so well in the book is that you showed people that whether they're aware of it or not, they do oftentimes have, emotional, attachments or connections to their money, And so I think that you just do a really good job of, allowing readers to have an opportunity not only to do the nuts and bolts work, but to also go on like an inner journey as well, and just allow their idea of what's possible even for them financially, to sort of, evolve to a place where it can really inspire them, so that when things do get really challenging, as they do on any journey, that they're motivated to keep going and are inspired on the path. So I just think you did such a wonderful job with that.
Thank you.
You're very inspirational, Jamila. Well, and part of that is telling your own story, right? Because I think that's another thing that you do very well is you relate to your audience as a fellow journeyer. You're not some guru who sits up on a mountain, and dispenses advice. Like, I have it all figured out, people. And if you can climb the summit and reach me, then I will share my wisdom with you. So you too can live on the mountaintop above it all. It's like, no, I am down here on the ground, with you all, fighting the same battles, making the same decisions, like doing the inner work as well. And I think that's one of many reasons why your audience, just gravitates toward you, because you're just like a very authentic, relatable voice in the space.
And I did want to make sure that came through. So telling a bit of my personal stories intertwined with the practical information people
Mm-hmm.
could apply was very important. I didn't want to do too much of it, but I
Mm-hmm.
understood if I'm going to be on the cover, then it should also, there should be a narrative from me where you
Mm-hmm.
can understand and hear my voice as you read it.
Mm-hmm.
Especially like if you knew me already from the podcast, you could say, oh yeah, that's Jamila talking.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you
Mm-hmm.
didn't know me, it was that, okay, how do I get the person who's just like picking this up that has no clue who I am to kind of care about what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying to help them? And it's funny because one of the reviews that I did have on Amazon, the person started it out. It ultimately was a good review, but they were like, she talks about herself a bit. And that was like the first time I heard like someone almost complaining about how much of my
Mm-hmm.
story was in it.
Mm-hmm.
But, here's why I think it's so important to be good with the work you do, because that didn't bother me at all, because I knew, like, I was like, that was the point. Like, I had, like, me being in it was not non-negotiable. And so
Yes.
like it's not, and I knew for me at least I didn't think it was too much. So like even hearing like feedback like that, I was like, oh, I got it right, because it's at least enough to where most people so far haven't been complaining about it. So
Mm.
it feels very aligned with the way I run the podcast. My personal life is interjected, and then also kind of like the practical things that I talk about.
Yes. No. And I personally didn't think there was too much, it didn't feel like a memoir or something,
Yeah, yeah.
but we did talk about, like we said, it's like I remember having those conversations about how much of your personal story should you include, where should we include your personal story, and I do think it's important because, it's like I said, it's very easy, to present yourself as someone who already has it all figured out, but to be authentic and to share your, the more vulnerable aspects of your personal journey, I think it's just really important. And like I said, and it helps people see, that you once were where they are now, and so they can see what's possible and have a better sense of that for themselves based on their knowledge and awareness of you and everything that you've done to get where you are. And I just think it's helpful. All right. So, we have spoken a little bit about what book number 2 could possibly look like. And so, are you willing to share with us, now that your first book has officially launched into the world, if you've started thinking about a second book yet? And if so, what that book could possibly talk about?
I feel like I'm still coming like off of like the adrenaline and emotions of the first book, and still,
Mm-hmm.
got to be honest, there's still some insecurity. As much as I talk about that I am happy with the end result and really do feel like proud of my work, there is still a bit of like, at like, is it good enough in terms of for commercial success? Like, was it good
Mm.
enough for the publisher to come and ask me to do another one? Because maybe they're
Mm-hmm.
just like, we thought you were going to do way better than this. Why would we give you another deal or another person, right? And like,
Yes.
honestly, like that's part of not a fear, because I don't know that I want to write another book yet, just because it feels so close to just
Mm.
finishing that process.
Mm-hmm.
um but there is part of me that says, but would someone actually want me to write another book, right? And I don't want to just like throw out like a book just because, like, if I do write another one, I really do want to feel like called to it and feel like I have something important to say. And 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 so part of me wants to kind of come off of like this ramp, and I don't know how long it's going to take. I do
Mm-hmm.
want to see this through. I was told that, the best way to sell a first book or to move on from something is just kind of just focus on something else. Like,
Yes.
so like, not that I'm obsessing, but like not thinking too much about how this book is doing and sales, but more about, okay, what can I continue? What can I do to push my work forward that still feels good and authentic? And kind of like, instead of just like standing still and waiting for what has happened already to unfold, like how can I continue just
Mm.
to move forward? So with that, I don't have plans necessarily for a second book right away, but I'm not going to say it won't happen or never. I think I'm open to it. And sometimes I think, like, will it be a finance book? But then I think my work is so closely related to finance right now, like how could it not be?
Mm.
But
Mm-hmm.
then maybe it will take a couple, like just some more space in my life and more developments in me to grow, so that I have something else to share or teach or um, give to an audience that can actually help them. Like, so maybe I have to live a bit more and live life and do more things to do
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah, and I think that that's wisdom. I'm not a fan of publishing a book just for the sake of publishing a book, especially a second book. Like we talked about the fear of the sophomore slump. But I do think, you really do have to be inspired and feel like you have something valuable that you want to share with the world, because books take a lot of words. And if you're going to fill a whole book, it's like you have to have a very well developed, fully realized concept, to share with the world. And sometimes that does take time, for that to come through. And so I know I obviously personally feel like you definitely have at least one more, if not two more books in you, Jamila. So I'm excited to see when inspiration strikes and what that second book turns out to be.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Amanda, I just want to thank you for coming on the show. Not only like being one of my biggest support system, I don't think I could have written this book, Your Journey to Financial Freedom, without you. Like, all your support and help, and even like coming on and spending all this time chatting with my audience, I think, just shows like how dedicated you are to this work, and your work matters. And so I just want to thank you for bringing the best out of me. And I'm yeah, I love that I can still text you now about a question that I have, or like, hey,
Yes.
this is like, what does this mean? Or just, and you share like your wins with your clients and like what's going on in your world. So I just love that relationship. So I just want to say thank you, for helping
You're
me with this whole
very
process.
welcome. Well, one of my other favorite sayings is that yes, we may be in the publishing business, but we're truly in the relationship business. And I feel that, the greatest successes in publishing come from when authors just have really strong, meaningful relationships with everyone that touches their book along the way. And so I am just so grateful and still remain thoroughly humbled to have been invited to be part of your publishing process. It really is an honor and a joy for me. And I'm just really grateful that that comes through, in the way that my authors respond to me, and just the ongoing relationship I have with many of my authors. It's just, they're not only my clients, they're also very dear friends, as you are to me.
Oh, and Amanda, please let everyone know where they can like find out more about your work and what you do.
Yes. So the best place to find out more about me and the work I'm doing is my website, which is amandabauch.com. So Amanda, B as in boy, AUCH.com. And on that website, you will see the fabulous Jamila highlighted because she gave me an incredible, mind blowing testimonial about her work with me. So, and you can also, of course, like Jamila said, find out about other authors that I have worked with and, some of my career highlights and also what type of work I do and how you can reach out if you're interested in working with me.
Thank you so much, Amanda.
All right. Thank you, Jamila.